Whitney Houston was three verses into Greatest Love of All at Madison Square Garden when her voice began to shake. Not from vocal strain, but from something deeper, the weight of everything she'd been carrying for months. What happened next proved that true friendship doesn't wait for an invitation, and the surprise appearance that followed became one of the most beautiful moments in music history. If this incredible story of friendship and support moves you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments about a time when a friend showed up for you when you needed it most. It was September 18th, 1999, at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Whitney was performing what many were calling her comeback concert, though she hated that term. She wasn't coming back from anywhere, she insisted. She'd never left. But the music industry and media had been less than kind during her recent difficult period, and tonight felt like she was proving herself all over again. The 20,000 fans packed into the legendary venue were completely supportive, giving her standing ovations before she'd even finished songs. But Whitney could feel the weight of expectations, the unspoken questions about whether she still had it, whether the voice was still there in all its glory. As she moved through her set list, hitting every note with technical precision, something felt different. Not wrong exactly, but vulnerable in a way that both terrified and liberated her. When she announced that she wanted to perform Greatest Love of All, the arena erupted. This was her song, the one that had defined her message for over a decade. But as Whitney began singing, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in her career, she felt truly alone on stage. The irony wasn't lost on her, singing about self-love and inner strength while feeling more fragile than she had in years. As she reached the bridge, the part about children being our future, her voice caught slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for Whitney to feel exposed. But what happened next would remind Whitney why she never had to face anything alone. In the wings of Madison Square Garden, completely unannounced and unknown to Whitney's team, Michael Jackson stood quietly watching his friend perform. He'd flown in from Los Angeles that morning on a private jet, telling only his security team where he was going. Michael had been reading the industry coverage of Whitney's return to touring, had seen the subtle implications that she needed to prove herself again. He knew that feeling better than almost anyone, the pressure of being scrutinized, of having every performance analyzed for signs of decline or struggle. More than that, he recognized something in Whitney's voice tonight, a vulnerability that reminded him of his own difficult moments, when the stage felt more like a judgment bench than a place of artistic expression. Michael had called Whitney's longtime friend and musical director, Ricky Minor, 3 days earlier. "I want to surprise Whitney at Madison Square Garden," he'd said simply. "She doesn't know I'm coming. I just want to be there for her." Ricky had been moved by the gesture but worried about logistics. "Michael, you know security will be intense. How do we get you in without word getting out?" "Let me worry about that," Michael had replied. "Just have my microphone ready if I need it." What Ricky didn't know was that Michael had been planning this surprise for weeks. Ever since Whitney had announced her return to touring, Michael had been quietly monitoring the media coverage and industry chatter. He'd heard the whispers about whether she could still deliver, whether the struggles of recent years had diminished her legendary voice. It reminded him painfully of his own experiences with public scrutiny. Michael knew intimately what it felt like to have every performance dissected, every vocal choice analyzed for signs of decline. He remembered nights when the pressure felt so intense that stepping onto a stage felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. But more than the industry pressure, Michael was concerned about his friend's emotional state. During their last phone conversation 2 weeks earlier, Whitney had mentioned feeling disconnected from her music in a way she'd never experienced before. She'd described standing on stage and feeling like she was performing someone else's songs, like the joy that had always sustained her had been replaced by obligation. "I keep thinking about when we were kids," Whitney had told him during that call, "when singing felt like breathing, you know? When did it become so complicated?" Michael had stayed awake that night thinking about their conversation. He understood that feeling of losing touch with the pure love of music that had driven them both since childhood. The solution wasn't therapy or time off or industry advice. Sometimes it was simply being reminded that someone believed in you, that your gift still mattered. The logistics of attending Whitney's concert incognito had been complex. Michael's usual entourage of security and assistants would have made secrecy impossible. Instead, he'd traveled with just two trusted bodyguards, using a private entrance at Madison Square Garden that Ricky had arranged through venue management. Michael had arrived at the arena 3 hours before showtime, spending the evening in a small office near the backstage area. He could hear the sound checks, the crew preparing for Whitney's entrance, the growing excitement of fans filing into their seats. Several times he'd considered whether he was making the right choice. Surprise appearances could backfire, could be seen as upstaging rather than supporting. But something in Whitney's voice during their last conversation had convinced him that she needed to know she wasn't facing this moment alone. True friendship sometimes required taking risks, making gestures that might be misunderstood by others, but would be recognized by the person who mattered most. Now, watching Whitney from the side of the stage, Michael could see what he'd sensed over the phone in recent conversations. His friend was struggling with more than just industry pressure. She was questioning herself in a way that broke his heart. When Whitney reached the line, "I found the greatest love of all inside of me," her voice wavered with genuine emotion. The crowd, thinking it was intentional artistry, responded with louder applause. But Michael heard what they couldn't, the sound of someone fighting to believe her own words. That's when Michael Jackson did something that no one, including Whitney, expected. Without any announcement, without any coordination with the sound engineers, Michael began singing harmony from the wings. His distinctive voice, unmistakable even when soft, began weaving around Whitney's melody on the line, "The greatest love of all is easy to achieve." Whitney's eyes widened. She knew that voice better than almost any other in the world. But it couldn't be Michael. He was supposed to be in Los Angeles working on his album. She kept singing, thinking perhaps the emotional intensity of the moment was making her imagine things. But as the song continued, the harmony grew stronger, more confident. The sound engineers, initially confused by the unexpected audio, quickly realized what was happening and began bringing up Michael's microphone in the mix. The audience, at first puzzled by the additional voice, began to murmur with recognition. That distinctive tone, those signature vocal runs that could only belong to one person. Whitney turned toward the wings, her eyes searching the darkness beyond the stage lights. Then she saw him. Michael Jackson, in a simple black jacket and dark jeans, holding a microphone and singing along to her most personal song. Her face transformed completely. The vulnerability that had been weighing her down just moments before was replaced by pure joy and amazement. Her voice, which had been strong but cautious, suddenly soared with the confidence and power that had made her a legend. The moment their voices blended together, 20,000 people realized they were witnessing something magical. Michael stepped out of the wings and onto the stage, still singing, still supporting Whitney's lead vocal, with harmonies that seemed to lift her voice to even greater heights. The crowd erupted in the loudest applause of the evening, but both artists remained focused on the music, on the moment, on the gift they were giving each other. Whitney reached out her hand and Michael took it, both of them smiling with the genuine affection of old friends who understood each other's journey in ways few people ever could. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitney said, her voice now steady and strong, "my dear friend, Michael Jackson." The applause was deafening, but Michael gestured for quiet. "This is Whitney's night," he said into his microphone. "I'm just honored to share it with her." "No," Whitney said firmly, still holding his hand. "This is exactly what this song is about. Finding love and support when you need it most. Michael, you just reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." What followed was one of the most beautiful vocal collaborations ever captured live. They finished Greatest Love of All together, with Michael adding harmonies and vocal runs that complemented Whitney's lead perfectly. Then spontaneously, they moved into a gospel-influenced medley that showcased both of their church roots. Michael would sing a phrase from Man in the Mirror, and Whitney would answer with lines from Greatest Love of All. Whitney would start I Will Always Love You, and Michael would weave in melodies from She's Out of My Life. It was musical conversation between two artists who trusted each other completely. But the most powerful moment came when they sang together without any backing track at all. Whitney nodded to her band to stop playing, And suddenly the massive arena fell silent except for two voices, unadorned and pure. They sang a simple gospel hymn, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," that both had learned as children in church. The intimacy of the moment, two superstars stripped down to just their voices and their faith, was overwhelming. Many people in the audience were crying. Others were recording on their phones, knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented. When the song ended, Whitney and Michael embraced on stage. Not a celebrity photo op hug, but a real, genuine embrace between friends who had just shared something sacred. "Thank you," Whitney whispered to Michael, loud enough for the front rows to hear through the microphones they were still holding. "Thank you," Michael replied, "for reminding me why we do this." The backstory of how Michael knew to come that night reveals the depth of their friendship. After the concert, Whitney learned that Michael had been quietly following her tour through mutual friends and industry contacts. When he heard that she was having moments of self-doubt, when he sensed that she was struggling with the pressure of proving herself again, he made the decision to show up. "I know what it feels like," Michael told her as they sat in her dressing room afterward, "to feel like you have to be perfect every single time, to feel like people are waiting for you to fail. I couldn't let you go through that alone." Whitney was moved to tears. "I didn't even know I needed this until it happened," she admitted. "I was up there feeling so isolated, and then suddenly your voice was there, and everything made sense again." Michael explained that he'd been dealing with his own challenges, his own moments of questioning whether the music industry still had room for artists who prioritized artistry over commercial trends. Seeing Whitney push through her vulnerability had inspired him too. "We lift each other up," he said simply. "That's what friends do." The surprise duet at Madison Square Garden became legendary immediately. Bootleg recordings circulated for years, and professional footage from the concert became one of the most watched performance videos of all time. But more importantly, it marked a turning point for both artists. Within hours of the performance, news of Michael's surprise appearance had reached every major media outlet. Entertainment Tonight led with the story. MTV interrupted regular programming for a special report, and radio stations across the country were playing bootleg audio of the duet. But unlike typical celebrity news cycles that focused on drama or conflict, this story captured something different: genuine friendship and artistic support. Music critics, initially skeptical about what they assumed would be a publicity stunt, were unanimous in their praise. Rolling Stone's review called it a masterclass in vocal collaboration and human decency, while the New York Times wrote, "Jackson's unannounced appearance transformed what could have been a routine comeback concert into a profound statement about friendship in the music industry." More importantly for Whitney, the response from her peers was overwhelming. Aretha Franklin called her the next morning saying, "Baby, that's what real friends do. Michael showing up for you like that, that's love." Luther Vandross, he sent flowers with a note reading, "You and Michael reminded us all why we fell in love with music in the first place." The impact on Whitney's confidence was immediate and lasting. Band members and crew who worked with her during the rest of the tour noticed a difference in her stage presence. She seemed more relaxed, more connected to her material, more willing to take vocal risks and interact spontaneously with audiences. "It was like someone had reminded her she was still Whitney Houston," said her backup singer Sherry Johnson. "Not the Whitney Houston who had to prove anything to anyone, just Whitney Houston who loved to sing and had one of the greatest voices God ever created." For Michael, the evening had been equally transformative, though in ways that wouldn't become apparent until later. The decision to show up for Whitney without any expectation of reciprocal benefit had reminded him of why he'd entered the music industry in the first place. It wasn't about chart positions or album sales or critical reviews. It was about connection, about using music to touch other people's lives. In his private journal, which his family released excerpts from years later, Michael wrote about that night. "I went to support Whitney, but she ended up supporting me too. Hearing our voices together reminded me that music is meant to be shared, not hoarded. Standing on that stage with her, I felt like Michael again, not just Michael Jackson the brand. Sometimes the best performances happen when you forget you're performing." The impact of that night extended far beyond the performance itself. Whitney later said that Michael's surprise appearance reminded her that she didn't have to carry the weight of expectations alone. The confidence she found that night carried through the rest of her tour and into her subsequent album recordings. Michael, inspired by the power of showing up for a friend, began making similar gestures for other artists who were struggling. He would surprise Janet Jackson at a concert in Chicago, provide unannounced backing vocals for Diana Ross at a benefit show, and mentor young artists who were feeling overwhelmed by industry pressure. The friendship between Whitney and Michael, already strong, became even deeper after that night. They began calling each other before major performances, offering encouragement and support. They would meet privately to work on music together, sessions that were never recorded or publicized, but that kept both of them connected to their love of pure artistry. The final chapter of their friendship is both heartbreaking and beautiful. In the years that followed, both Whitney and Michael faced continued scrutiny and personal challenges, but they maintained their support for each other, often communicating through family members and mutual friends when direct contact became difficult. Their friendship evolved into something deeper and more meaningful after that September night. They developed a private tradition of sending each other voice messages before major performances, not formal well wishes, but simple recordings of them humming melodies or singing gospel hymns they'd learned as children. These messages became a source of strength for both artists during difficult periods. Whitney would later reveal in interviews that Michael's surprise appearance had saved her from making a potentially devastating decision. She'd been considering retiring from live performance altogether, convinced that the joy of singing had been permanently damaged by industry pressure and personal struggles. That night at Madison Square Garden, she said in a 2005 interview, Michael reminded me that music isn't about perfection, it's about connection. He showed me that my voice still mattered, not because it was technically flawless, but because it could still touch people. Michael, meanwhile, began incorporating the lesson of that evening into his approach to his own career. He started making more surprise appearances at other artists' concerts, not for publicity but for the pure joy of musical collaboration. He would join Stevie Wonder at a charity event in Detroit, surprise Diana Ross during her birthday celebration at Radio City Music Hall, and provide uncredited backing vocals for several emerging artists who were struggling with industry pressure. The ripple effects of their friendship extended beyond their personal relationship. Other established artists began following their example, showing up to support peers who were facing difficult periods. The music industry, which had long been characterized by competition and rivalry, started to see more examples of collaboration and mutual support. Record executives and managers noticed that artists who supported each other publicly and privately tended to have longer, more sustainable careers. The Whitney and Michael model became an informal template for how superstars could maintain their humanity while navigating the pressures of fame. Music historians would later identify the September 1999 Madison Square Garden concert as a turning point in how the entertainment industry approached artist well-being. The genuine emotion and authentic connection displayed that night contradicted the prevailing narrative that successful artists had to maintain competitive distance from their peers. When Michael died in 2009, Whitney was devastated. She was scheduled to perform at a charity event that night and dedicated her entire set to his memory, including a solo performance of Man in the Mirror that left the audience in tears. Michael taught me that showing up for someone doesn't require an invitation, Whitney said that night. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is just be there when someone needs you, whether they ask for it or not. 3 years later, when Whitney passed away in 2012, Michael's family released a statement that included a line from his private journals. Whitney reminded me that our voices are strongest when they lift each other up. That night at Madison Square Garden, she gave me a gift I carried with me always. The knowledge that friendship can heal any stage fright, any self-doubt, any fear. Today, the legacy of that surprise duet continues to inspire artists and friends alike. Madison Square Garden now has a small plaque backstage that reads, "In memory of the magic that happens when friends show up for each other. September 18, 1999. Every major artist who performs at MSG learns the story of Whitney and Michael, and many have incorporated surprise guest appearances into their own shows. The video of their duet is still watched millions of times each year, not just for the musical brilliance, but for the demonstration of genuine friendship at its finest. Comments from viewers consistently mention how the performance shows what real support looks like, how two people at the top of their field chose to lift each other up rather than compete. Music schools now use the performance as an example of how collaboration can enhance rather than diminish individual artistry. The way Michael supported Whitney's lead vocals while adding his own distinctive style became a template for successful duets. But perhaps the most important legacy is the reminder that friendship doesn't wait for convenient timing or formal invitations. Sometimes the most meaningful support comes from showing up unannounced when someone is struggling, from offering your voice when theirs feels weak, from standing beside someone when they feel alone. The story of Whitney and Michael at Madison Square Garden teaches us something profound about friendship and artistry. True friends don't wait to be asked for help. They pay attention, they notice when someone is struggling, and they show up. Michael could have sent flowers or called with encouragement, but he chose to be physically present when Whitney needed support most. The magic of that night wasn't just the surprise or the musical collaboration. It was the demonstration that even superstars, even legends, need friends who will step into the spotlight with them when the weight of expectations becomes too heavy to carry alone. In a world that often emphasizes competition over collaboration, Whitney and Michael showed that the most powerful performances come not from trying to outshine each other, but from helping each other shine brighter. Sometimes the greatest love of all isn't something you find inside yourself. Sometimes it's something friends help you remember you had all along. And sometimes the most incredible thing someone can do is simply show up, add their voice to yours, and remind you that you're never singing alone. The surprise that changed everything wasn't just Michael's appearance on stage. It was the reminder that friendship can transform any performance, any challenge, any moment of doubt into something beautiful. As Whitney and Michael proved that September night, the best harmonies in life come not from perfect voices, but from perfect friends. If this story of friendship and support inspired you, make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories about the human connections behind music's greatest moments. And remember, like Michael showed Whitney, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up for someone who needs to know they're not alone.